Welcome to Dark Knight Films Reviews and Action Movie Night. I know you might be thinking, Matt, why are you wearing a Western shirt? Well, because tonight we are doing a top 10 video of the top 10 Western movies of all time. And I won't be doing this alone. I am joined tonight by Buddy Campbell.
Well, thanks, Matt. It's good to be here and looking forward to this list. Appreciate you having me on.
Now, one thing I want to note on this list is we will not be including any films by Clint Eastwood or John Wayne because they will be getting their own top 10 list.
And no Pauly Shore movies.
Let's get started then. My number 10 is Django Unchained, released in 2012. Directed by Quentin Tarantino, this film stars Christoph Waltz, Jamie Foxx, Leonardo DiCaprio, and frickin' Samuel L. Jackson. So, I mean, it's a hell of a cast. Now, I will note that I am not a huge fan of either Jamie Foxx or Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't like either one of them. But the two films that I do like of Leonardo DiCaprio are both Westerns. This film, Django Unchained, and Quick and the Dead. And Quick and the Dead came close to making my top 10, so I guess you could say that's a bit of an honorable mention here. But I just think Django Unchained is the better film out of them and made my list a little better than what Quick and the Dead was. And I do like the fact that Leonardo DiCaprio's character is such a completely despicable asshole. I just could not wait for him to get killed. So, that's good. And Jamie Foxx was great as Django. I really enjoyed his performance. I thought he was great in this. So, kudos to him on that. And Quentin Tarantino, as usual, great directing in this thing. Buddy, what's your number 10?
I'm going to start off my top 10 list with a movie that's not your traditional Western. It doesn't have those classic elements that most people think of when they think of Westerns, but still, I put it at number 10. It was directed by Joe Johnston. It came out in 2004. Joe had done such movies like Jurassic Park 3 and Jumanji. And it stars Viggo Mortensen and the legendary Omar Sharif. Now, the story is roughly based on a true story, and it focuses on this cowboy named Frank Hopkins. Now, Frank is traveling with this traveling Wild West show alongside Buffalo Bill and Annie Oakley. Now, he's approached by this Arabian sheik who challenges him to come to Saudi Arabia to race in this long-distance endurance race known as the Ocean of Fire. So Frank accepts the challenge, and he and his horse Hidalgo, they travel halfway around the world over to Saudi Arabia and enter this race. So the race itself, it's over thousands of miles across the Arabian desert, and it's not only challenging to Frank and his horse physically, but it also challenges their mental toughness as well. They're also having to deal with their sinister competitors as well, who will stop at nothing to make sure that an American doesn't win this race. So not your traditional Western storyline, but still it was a great movie, and so I have it at number 10 on my list.
Well, my number 9 is going to be 3:10 to Yuma from 2007. directed by the amazing James Mangold. And this cast in this thing is, I mean, you have Russell Crowe, you have Christian Bale, and you have Ben Foster. And I don't think Ben Foster gets enough attention for being an amazing villain in films. This guy can play really good bad guys in films. And he's done it in multiple films. And in this one, it's no different. I mean, he's just so good in this film. He definitely holds his own against greats like Russell Crowe and Christian Bale in this film. I really did like this film. I think it's an amazing Western film.
At number 9, I have a movie that came out in 1985 called Silverado. Now, it was directed by Lawrence Kasdan, who had done movies like The Big Chill and Body Heat, and then later on French Kiss. But it stars Scott Glenn, Kevin Kline, Danny Glover, Kevin Costner, and Brian Dennehy. Now, the movie is about a cowboy played by Scott Glenn named Emmett. And he begins riding with a group of other cowboys played by Kevin Kline, Danny Glover, and Kevin Costner. And they soon find themselves in the town of Silverado. There they meet the local town tyrant played by the oh-so-smarmy Brian Dennehy. Well, soon thereafter, of course, chaos ensues, and it just leads the viewer on a rootin' tootin' fun adventure. And while it's not a comedy per se, it does have some lighter moments and mixed in with all the action. It's one of my favorite Westerns of all time, and that's why I have it at number 9 on my list.
Number 8 on my list is The Wild Bunch from 1969, directed by the legendary Sam Peckinpah. Now, this one is another one that has just an amazing ensemble cast. William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, Warren Oates, Robert Ryan. It is really great cast in this. And just like any Sam Peckinpah film, I mean, it is bloody, it's exciting. It is a great Western film. I really love this film. Really great Western film.
At number 8, I have an old school Western from 1953 called Shane. Now, it's one of those quintessential classic Westerns that are on a lot of top 10 best Western lists. Now, it stars Alan Ladd, Jack Palance, Jean Arthur, Van Heflin, and Ben Johnson. Now, Alan Ladd plays the title character of Shane. Now, he's a cowboy who's just trying to settle down as a farmhand in a quiet area of Wyoming, working for a homesteader played by Van Heflin and his wife played by the lovely Jean Arthur. And Shane also befriends their young son Joey. But soon Shane gets caught up in a power battle between the small town ranchers and the local cattle baron. Now, the climax of the film comes when Shane has a classic showdown with the bad guys that he just can't avoid. And it leads to one of the most heralded endings in movie history. And in my opinion, no best Western list is ever complete unless it has the movie Shane in it. And I have it at number 8.
Now, while my number 7 is going to be Gore Vidal's Billy the Kid, released in 1989, directed by William Graham. Now, this one started off a TNT television movie, but it ended up getting a theatrical release very similar to another TNT film, Gettysburg, after the film turned out better than what Ted Turner was expecting. So he gave it a very limited theatrical release, and that's why I can make this list. It's not just a TV movie. It actually got a theatrical release at one point. So this one stars a really good cast as well. You got Val Kilmer, you got Duncan Regehr, who I don't think gets enough credit. He played in the TV version of Zorro, and he was incredible in that. And then, of course, he played in The Monster Squad as Dracula. He's just a great actor that doesn't get enough credit. And then, of course, you had Wilford Brimley in this film as well. And it is the most accurate portrayal and most realistic you've ever gotten Billy the Kid. Now, Sam Peckinpah directed his own Billy the Kid movie with Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, but it was very fictionalized and everything, very similar to Young Guns as well. And that's why those films didn't make my list, but this one does, because this is the most historically accurate portrayal of Billy the Kid ever. And Val Kilmer was amazing playing the role.
Coming in at number 7, I probably have the most iconic movie Western in cinematic history. It came out in 1952. It was directed by Fred Zinnemann. It starred Gary Cooper, Grace Kelly, Lloyd Bridges, Lee Van Cleef, Lon Chaney Jr., and Ian McDonald. And it's called High Noon. Now, it stars the legendary Gary Cooper as a lawman named Will Kane. Now, on the day he plans to retire and get married to his fiancée, played by Grace Kelly, he gets word that an outlaw he sent to prison years ago is now out and has vowed to come back to town and seek his revenge on Will. Now, the outlaw is named Frank Miller, and he's played very well by Ian McDonald. Now, Marshall Kane has the dilemma of whether to stay and fight or leave town with his new bride and leave the town defenseless against Miller and his gang of outlaws. And to make matters worse, there's nobody in town willing to help Will fight Miller and his gang. Now, the movie has this timeless battle of good versus evil laid out in black and white, but it never loses its intense edge, even right up to the end. So at number 7, I've got High Noon.
Well, my number 6 is going to be The Long Riders, released in 1980, directed by the amazing Walter Hill. This one is an incredible film, not only because Walter Hill directs a great Western with this film, and it feels like a classic great Western, but it also, all of the family members in this film, for the most part, are played by real family members and brothers and whatever. You have the Youngers being played by David, Robert, and Keith Carridine. You have the Jameses are played by Stacy and James Keach. Then you have the Millers played by Dennis and Randy Quade. And then, of course, you have the Fords played by Christopher and Nicholas Guest. So it was the most unique casting because you have real brothers, real family members here playing these brothers and family members in this film. And it really added a lot of authenticity to it because it really feels like, I mean, yeah, the storyline, Walter Hill does make it a little bit more, he does take a few liberties with the facts, but it is probably as close as you could get to how things really happened with the James Youngers gang and everything.
So coming in at number 6, I have the all-time classic, The Magnificent Seven. Now, it came out in 1960. It was directed by John Sturgis. It starred Steve McQueen, Yul Brenner, Charles Bronson, Eli Wallach, and the remake came out in 2016. It was directed by Antoine Fuqua. It starred Denzel Washington, Chris Pratt, Ethan Hawke, Peter Sarsgaard. In a nutshell, it's about a small town being taken over by a ruthless industrialist, which forces the townspeople to hire a group of gunslingers to come in and save the town by fighting off the evil villains. The evil industrialist in the first one was played by the always solid Eli Wallach, and by Peter Sarsgaard in the remake. While the premise is fairly simple, what makes this movie stand out from other westerns with similar storylines was just the coolness of the actors who were playing the gunslingers. Whether it was Steve McQueen or Yul Brenner and Charles Bronson in the first one, or Denzel Washington and Chris Pratt or Ethan Hawke in the remake, you know you were getting an impressive performance by these legends in every scene that they were in. And for that reason, that made both of these versions stand out and just made them both so good. So at number 6, I have The Magnificent Seven.
Coming in at my number 5 is Once Upon a Time in the West, released in 1968, directed by the legendary Sergio Leone. And I mean, this one has a great cast in it as well. You might find a trend in that with my list. It's basically a lot of ensemble casts in these, and this one is no different. I mean, it has Charles Bronson, Jason Robards, Henry Fonda, Claudia Cardinale, and she was just so gorgeous back in the day. So her playing the primary female in this film, she is such a strong female, and she is just so gorgeous that you just can't help but get behind her character in the scenes that she's in. And of course you have Bronson playing the man with harmonica. I mean, there is no better badass in a Western film other than him. I mean, just playing the harmonica right before he goes off and kills somebody. I mean, that is, and the backstory behind that harmonica and why he carries it, great. And Henry Fonda just plays an amazing villain in this, which he didn't get to do a lot. So Sergio gave him a chance to really go at it and play a villain for once in his career, because Henry Fonda usually played the good guys. So in this one, he was playing a totally evil bad guy. It's a really great film.
Oh man, we're getting right up there at the top of the list now with some of the great westerns of all time. At number 5, I have one of the most iconic movies ever. It came out in 1969. It was directed by the legendary Sam Peckinpah. The movie starred William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, Robert Ryan, Warren Oates, Ben Johnson, Strother Martin, and a host of other iconic actors. And it is called The Wild Bunch. Now, the movie is set in 1913. It's in the last days of the Old West. Now, it starts off by having a gang of outlaws led by Pike Bishop, who is played by William Holden. And he has them doing one last bank heist before they retire. So this bank robbery down in South Texas, it goes bad, and the outlaws have to flee to Mexico to get away from the posse, which ironically is led by Bishop's old friend Deke Thornton, who is played by Robert Ryan. So now the gang is in Mexico, but they have nothing to show for their botched bank robbery back in Texas. So they decide to rob a U.S. ammunitions transport en route to Mexican rebels who are fighting their own civil war. So what can go wrong with that? Well, the end result is some of the bloodiest scenes ever shown at the time. In fact, when the movie came out in 1969, many considered it the most violent movie in movie history at that point. But Sam Peckinpah was able to turn this violent Western into one of the most iconic movies ever, and it absolutely deserves to be on this list. And so I have The Wild Bunch at number 5.
Coming in at number 4 for me is going to be True Grit, 2010, directed by the Coen brothers. Now, I love Jeff Bridges, Hailee Steinfeld, and Matt Damon in this film. They are amazing. Barry Pepper does a really good job in this film as well. This is another one that's got a really great cast. Josh Brolin, who I normally really like in most of the roles that he plays. This one, I think he was really miscast in the role that he plays in this. But he is the only drawback in this film, other than, Barry Pepper's not near as good as Robert Duvall was in the original True Grit film with John Wayne. But every other aspect of this film, I think, is better than the original classic. And that's saying something. That's giving a lot of credit to the Coen brothers in this thing. I think this film is one of the best westerns, and that's why I make it my number 4 on this list.
Well, gee whiz, Matt! Thanks for stealing my thunder. No. Well, I guess it's true what they say. Great minds do think alike. Because at number 4, I also have True Grit from 2010. Now, I stayed away from the 1969 version since we had to promise that we would not have any John Wayne movies or Clint Eastwood movies or Pauly Shore movies on this list. So the 2010 version of True Grit was directed by the Coen brothers, and they had done such great movies like Fargo and The Big Lebowski and Oh Brother Where Art Thou, but they got Jeff Bridges to play the lead role of Rooster Cogburn in this movie, stepping into the shoes of John Wayne. And Jeff did such an incredible job in the lead role. It just had a great ensemble cast of supporting characters as well. Now, the movie was beautifully shot, as all Coen Brothers movies are, great cinematography. But the story itself is based on a novel written by Arkansas native Charles Portis. And the story focuses on a 14-year-old farm girl from Dardanelle, Arkansas named Maddie Ross. Now, she is hell-bent on killing the man who killed her pa. And the dastardly varmint's name is Tom Chaney, and he's played by Josh Brolin. Now, he has fled to the Oklahoma Territory to hide out. So Maddie treks across western Arkansas to the town of Fort Smith. Now, Fort Smith lies right on the edge of the Oklahoma Territory. Now, when Maddie gets there, she's looking to hire someone who can do the job, someone with true grit. So she picks a old veteran lawman by the name of Reuben Rooster Cogburn. But the only caveat is she insists on going with him into Oklahoma to get Tom Chaney. And part of that is because Rooster has a reputation of being a drunken reprobate. So, but they end up teaming with a Texas Ranger by the name of LaBeef, played incredibly well by Matt Damon. And then the end result is a manhunt that turns the movie into an all-time classic. So at number 4, I have True Grit, 2010.
Coming in at number 3, I have The Magnificent Seven from 1960. Directed by the legendary John Sturges. And this film is another one. Great ensemble cast. Yul Brenner, Eli Wallach, James Coburn, Charles Bronson, and of course, how can you forget, Steve McQueen. And Steve McQueen, pretty much any scenes he's in with Yul Brenner, he steals the show from him. That's the reason why, Yul Brynner began to despise McQueen. He was the reason that McQueen got cast for this originally. So that was what was funny about it. He wanted him in this film because he had seen him in the TV series Wanted, Dead or Alive. And he wanted him in this film. Once he got him in, McQueen just stole the show from him every chance he got. And hence the reason why when they made Return of the Magnificent Seven, Yul Brynner made sure that Steve McQueen was nowhere to be found.
Well, coming in at number 3, I have a movie that Matt has already mentioned called The 3:10 to Yuma. Now, the original came out in 1957, but the version that I really liked came out in 2007, and it was directed by James Mangold, and it starred Russell Crowe, Christian Bale. And this journey is an incredible saga through some wild ambushes, incredible shootouts. But what makes this movie stand out is Bale's performance as Dan. Now, Dan not only needs the money to save his farm, but he also has to prove to his young son that he's not the timid, passive weakling that his son thinks he is. And the inner battle Dan shows between the responsible father type that he wants to be, battling the image of the tough fighter that his son thinks he should be, is one of the greatest performances I've ever seen in a Western. And so at number 3, I have 3:10 to Yuma.
My number 2, and this might be controversial, but my number 2 is going to be Silverado, 1985, directed by Lawrence Kasdan. This film stars Kevin Kline, Kevin Costner, Danny Glover, Scott Glenn. It is a great Western with awesome performances all throughout it. A guy that you never expect to see in a Western. With Kevin Kline, and he's pretty freaking cool in this film. Danny Glover is amazing as always. Kevin Costner in one of his earlier roles, before he started getting that whole bland and kind of same old, boring kind of performance that he would give, which really irked me with him throughout his career. Thankfully, Costner in recent years here with the TV show Yellowstone, and prior to that the miniseries The Hatfields and McCoys, he has started to put more oomph into his performances. But Silverado, great Western, doesn't get enough credit. That's why it's my number 2.
All right, coming in at number 2, from 1969, I have Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It was directed by George Roy Hill. It starred Paul Newman, Robert Redford, Catherine Ross, and Strother Martin. Now, the movie is very loosely based on 2 Old West outlaws by the name of Robert Leroy Parker and Harry Longbaugh, but they're better known as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Now, Butch is played by Paul Newman, who is the self-proclaimed brains of the gang, and Sundance is played by Robert Redford, who's quick with a gun. Now, there are too many plot twists to discuss here, but the film gives us a treasure trove of just unforgettable scenes with Newman and Redford arguing with each other about what their next move should be. And we get great lines like, "Who were those guys?" and "I can't swim." We even get Newman doing riding tricks on his new bicycle while a B.J. Thomas song plays in the background. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. Now, Newman and Redford, they probably had the best on-screen chemistry of any 2 actors in a buddy movie in cinematic history. And when you throw in unforgettable character actors like Catherine Ross and Strother Martin and Cloris Leachman. It just makes the movie an absolute delight to watch. So coming in at number 2, it's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
All right, my number 1, it's going to be Tombstone, 1993, directed by George P. Cosmatos. This film, starring Kurt Russell, Val Kilmer, Sam Elliott, Michael Biehn, Powers Booth, Bill Paxton. I mean, it just had name after name after name, and everybody gave a great performance. Hell, even Jason Priestley's in this film, and he even gives a pretty good performance in the role that he's playing. So, I mean, this film, it may not be the most historically accurate on all accounts about the Earps and the Cowboys, but I think it's probably, it was definitely the most accurate for the gunfight at OK Corral, how quickly that battle happened and everything. Most other films have it happen in an actual corral, which it didn't. And most films have it being this big, long shootout. Hell, the movie The Gunfight at OK Corral, even though I love the cast in it, with Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas, it had a big-ass shootout that happened all over town. I mean, so this is the most accurate the gunfight had ever been, and this is one of the very few films, other than Hour of the Gun with James Garner and Jason Robards, that actually shows Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday and the rest of his group going after the Cowboys and killing them off one by one. So that is my number 1, and I believe that is one of the greatest westerns of all time.
So here we are at number 1, and I don't think there's ever been any doubt that Matt and I were going to have the same movie as our number 1. We've discussed this movie so many times, all the ins and outs of it, and it never gets old to talk about this movie. So obviously at number 1, I have Tombstone from 1993, directed by George Cosmatos. This movie had what I think the greatest cast that has ever been assembled for a movie ever. There's been some incredible movies with incredible casts before, but I mean, you start at the top with Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer, Sam Elliott, Bill Paxton, Powers Booth, Michael Biehn, Stephen Lang, Dana Delaney, Billy Zane, Joanna Pacula, Michael Rooker, Dana Wheeler Nicholson, Jason Priestley, Thomas Hayden Church, John Corbett. This was a movie that introduced the world to Billy Bob Thornton. He just burst on the scene with this movie, playing Johnny Tyler, Madcap. And the movie also featured 4 legendary Western actors from the golden age of Hollywood. And that was Buck Taylor as Creek Johnson, Harry Carey Jr. Playing Fred White, Charlton Heston, just unbelievable, playing Henry Hooker. And then Robert Mitchum did the narration for the film. Now, some people go to movies and they see a good movie. Some people go to a movie and you live an experience. And that was me with Tombstone. I was a big fan of Westerns when I was growing up as a kid. I just talked about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Thought that was going to be, would always be my favorite Western, until I saw Tombstone in the theater for the first time. And I was just so overwhelmed with it that I had to go back the next day and watch it again. If you're a fan of Westerns, you've already seen this movie and you know what it's about. There's no need discussing the storylines or the synopsis about this movie. But I did want to tell you about the impact it had at the time. In 1993, Westerns were dying out, but the genre was saved in the early 90s by this film and by Unforgiven, starring Clint Eastwood. But Tombstone was so memorable because of the great writing and the unforgettable quotes. I mean, we all remember.
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.
Say when.
Isn't that a daisy?
You tell him I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
I said throw down, boy.
Oh.
You gonna do something or just stand there and bleed?
Probably the most quotable movie of all time as well. But in the end, combined with the incredible cast, I mean, the unforgettable dialogue, the amazing action scenes, the fabulous cinematography, in my mind, it adds up to the greatest Western of all time. So at number 1, Tombstone.
All right, so between me and Buddy here, we have had varying degrees. Some of our picks have overlapped, but if a great movie is great in a Western, it's going to overlap into somebody's lists, one way or another. And hope you've enjoyed our list here. So we are done for another action movie night. Hope you'll join me tomorrow for video game night. Buddy will not be joining me for that one, though. So, all right. Hope you'll join me then. Thank you for watching.